Today we're going to continue our discussion about how we think about money by discussing the difference between rich people and wealthy people. Because the truth is that a lot of people that look rich are actually not spending their money the right way. And that's not to say that anybody should be telling anybody else how to spend their money. This is just in the sense of personal finance. If you want to be wealthy, there's one way to spend your money. If you just want to be rich and not wealthy, well, there's another way to spend it. And like in our previous videos, we are still discussing Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. A lot of great stuff in that book. Now, the first concept to think about is how you feel when you see someone who's rich. Let's take one of the most common indicators of someone being rich, their car. You know, rich people love to drive fancy cars. Well, what do you actually think when you see someone driving a fancy car? As Morgan Housel says, when you see someone driving a nice car, you rarely think, wow, the guy driving that car is really cool. Instead, you think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool. Now, subconscious or not, this is how people think. So what really happens is that we don't even think about that other person. We just think about ourselves once again, thinking, hey, I'd be really cool if I had that. Which makes sense. We're all very selfish and self-centered at the end of the day. But there's a paradox here, because people tend to want wealth, or in this case we're talking about being rich, right, to signal to others that they should be liked and admired. But in reality, when you buy a car and you try to make that happen, other people often bypass admiring you, not because they don't think your wealth is admirable, but because they use your wealth as a benchmark for their own desire to be liked and admired. And this was interesting to me because I never thought about it this way. But oftentimes all the things that people do in our societies, right, and this happens everywhere, this is just human interaction, because we're all tribalized and we all want to impress our tribe so that we're accepted. But oftentimes what happens in modern society, when you do all this stuff to impress other people, what do they react with? They don't think about you, they just think about themselves and start comparing. And honestly, more often than not, instead of admiration, you get a lot of jealousy. But people are so stuck in their heads that they're never thinking about you, they're just thinking about themselves. And they're comparing how they relate to you. So really, this doesn't work out for the person trying to show off and the person being shown off too. Both end up more miserable than before. Now, in a letter that Morgan wrote to his son after he was born, he said, "You might think you want an expensive car, a fancy watch, and a huge house, but I'm telling you, you don't. What you want is respect and admiration from other people, and you think having expensive stuff will bring it. It almost never does, especially from the people you want to respect and admire you." And if you think about it, that is very true. And you know the games that rich people play trying to one-up each other. If you don't know anyone personally, I'm sure you've at least seen Billions or a show like Billions. It's all a dick measuring contest, who could have the nicer car, the nicer house, etc., etc. It's funny though, because when you get to like hedge fund manager status and you have hundreds of millions, pretty soon you and all your peers, you could all buy jets, you could all buy the same material things, right? So then what these guys start competing on is the people that they surround themselves with. So they will literally start competing with their security forces. Not that these guys need a security force, but they get one just so they could compare with the other guys. So one rich hedge fund guy will have like a Green Beret and a Navy SEAL. All former Green Berets, Navy SEALs, you know, now they work security. And then he'll want to compare his security force with his buddy that's also a hedge fund manager and has his own force. And then that's how they try to measure who's better. It is all very stupid. So this is just a good reminder of how money should be used. Now, one of the main examples we've been talking about is buying a fancy car, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with buying a fancy car, especially if you're a car enthusiast. A lot of people just love cars, and that's great. But the point here is to identify why you're buying the things you're buying, and hopefully it's not to show off to other people and to gain that respect and admiration that you're not going to get through buying these things. It's a subtle recognition that people generally aspire to be respected and admired by others, and using money to buy fancy things may bring less of it than you imagine. If respect and admiration are your goal, be careful how you seek it. Humility, kindness, and empathy will bring you more respect than horsepower ever will. Now, if you fall into the trap of trying to buy expensive cars to show off to people, we would say you fall into the rich trap. Because you don't actually want to be rich. What you want to be is wealthy. So what exactly is the difference? Well, someone driving a $100,000 car might be wealthy. But the only data point you have about their wealth is that they have $100,000 less than they did before they bought the car. Or they have $100,000 more in debt. That's all you know about them. So do you know if they're actually wealthy or just rich? Because we tend to judge wealth by what we see, because that's the information we have in front of us. We can't see people's bank accounts or brokerage statements, so we rely on outward appearances to gauge their financial success. Cars, homes, Instagram photos. Modern capitalism makes helping people fake it until they make it a cherished industry. But the true wealth is what you don't see. So investor Bill Mann once said that there is no faster way to feel rich than to spend lots of money on really nice things. But the way to actually be rich, and we could say wealthy here, is to spend money you have and to not spend money you don't have. It's that simple. So okay, again, what's the difference between rich and wealthy? Well, rich is a current income. Someone driving a $100,000 car is almost certainly rich because even if they purchase the car with debt, you need a certain level of income to afford that monthly payment. Same with those who live in big homes. It's not hard to spot rich people. They often go out of their way to make themselves known. But wealth is hidden. It's income not spent. Wealth is an option not yet taken to buy something later. Its value lies in offering you options, flexibility, and growth to one day purchase more stuff than you could right now. See, the world is filled with people who look modest but are actually wealthy, and people who look rich who live at the razor's edge of insolvency. Keep this in mind when quickly judging others' success and setting your own goals. So what are we really talking about here? Well, the truth is when you see people stunning with their new cars and all their Instagram photos of their expensive vacations, you don't actually know what their financial situation is. And in America, there's a reason why there is so much debt. It's because a lot of these people, to keep up with the Joneses, which is comparing themselves to their peers and trying to one-up each other, no matter how small the scale is, in order to do that, they take on a lot of debt. So an example of this, and this is probably a few years ago, I don't know if it still happens. It probably still happens, but in different ways. But when I was coming out of college, a lot of the girls that I knew went to New York and became a social media manager for some company. What does that job really do? No one knows, most likely nothing. But they're living in New York, which is very expensive, and then according to their Instagrams, they're constantly on vacation or constantly eating at fancy restaurants. And you're sitting there wondering, well, you don't make that much being a social media manager. How is this possible? Well, of course it's possible if you max out your credit cards. Same thing with a guy in his 40s with a $100,000 car. Is he actually wealthy? He could be, but more often than not, he's just rich. And he puts a large portion of his paycheck into this car that he really can't afford, but he wants to look good. So people who are just rich are spending to their uppermost limit. That's what Morgan meant by the razor's edge of insolvency. But if you're wealthy, you are not spending up until that limit. You're saving so that you have freedom now and in the future. And that's what true wealth is, having those options and keeping yourself financially secure for the long term so that you have freedom. So wealthy doesn't equal the fanciest car or the biggest house. And that of course relates to the stock market because our mentality going into a trade shouldn't be to make the biggest trade possible at the cost of everything else. Because we know, what do we always talk about? Risk management. You want to be smart in how you bet and how you play in the market so that you can survive the long term. And that's similar to what we're talking about in the rich versus the wealthy mentality. Wealthy is where you want to be. And another problem that happens to rich people is that they become a slave to their own money. Their money owns them instead of them owning their money. And if you want to see what I'm talking about and how to avoid it, then watch this video right here. We talk all about how making more money can actually make you miserable if you don't manage it the right way. So click this video right here and I will see you there.